Buongiorno, Charles.
Buongiorno.
So I would like
hmm
to, if you could maybe tell us something about the news that you just posted in
Ah,
Facebook.
okay. Well, there are two big things that have happened basically in the last 10 days. One of which is that we received an award from the European Union for the Internationale Confederation, as we're calling it. And the second thing is that I was invited to curate the 2014 São Paulo Biennale. So both of those are sort of, mind-boggling in their complexity in some ways, but are tremendous opportunities, I think, both for the Abbemuseum and also for me and my colleagues who will work on in Sao Paulo.
Do you really have an idea already how you would like to approach it?
Sao Paulo.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I have.
Just
I
a
have
vision, a general
intuition.
vision.
Let me say that I have intuitions.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I think that's very important is that I'm doing the reverse of what almost every curator of the São Paulo Biennale has done in the past. They have known more or less the Brazilian situation, give or take, and they have gone out into the world to research what should be brought to São Paulo of relevance. In a sense, I'm doing exactly the opposite. Yeah, obviously I don't know the world, but I know more or less the artists and the kind of work that I want to bring here. Of course, I'll do some research and there'll be some new names and new projects added. But in 60-70% of the cases, I have such an experience that I'm going to work with people that I've already worked with, that I trust and I admire. But where the real work will happen is in Brazil and in South America more generally, but particularly in Brazil itself. In other words, to try, from my outsider's perspective, to figure out what's going on here, culturally, but also politically and socially, and to try and then reflect that back into the exhibition. So to try and make an exhibition that is, from my and my collaborators' point of view, relevant to Brazil, and to bring artists from elsewhere that seem to add to that dialogue. But that's going to be the fascinating that works for Brazil from the point of view of somebody who hardly knows the country.
In Europe, we all refer to Brazil as one of the largest emerging and developing economies. How do you see it?
Yeah, it's a cliche, no? I mean, I suppose there are two things to say. One it would be interesting to talk about Europe in that regard, because I think it's also a European position where Europe is provincializing itself in a certain way. It's feeling very sorry for itself. Yeah, it's feeling wounded, and I think that would be interesting to analyze on one level. On the other level, Brazil still has huge challenges in terms of infrastructure. It has huge challenges in terms of education. Certainly, globalization has helped Brazil and produced an elite, a fairly large elite. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about millions of people who are pretty well off, not to say extremely well off in many cases, and are committed to the cultural field as well as to the capitalist field, and those people, of course, are making a difference. There's also an interesting politics, politics of the left, which relates to Lula and to Chavez and to various things that are happening in South America. I'm not sure whether that's not running out of energy now. I'm not sure whether that's more a phenomenon of the last 10 years than it will be of the next 10 years. And that's an interesting moment for Brazil, it seems. Like, what is the continuation of this change, this rejection of the hardcore neoliberal model going to lead to? And of course, there are a lot of people also in Brazil who would like to go back to that hardcore neoliberal model. It's not that the battle is over. It's not that the battle is won. I think Europe has become incredibly cynical, and there are many problems in the spirit of Europe. But if we want to talk about Europe for a moment, the infrastructure still functions. The education system still, to a degree, functions. Yeah, there are still I'm not sure whether there's possibilities in the way that Europeans want the possibilities, which is to dominate the world, to control the world, to feel that they're the most important. But there are still possibilities within being a part of the world to contribute something useful. And I don't think we should lose sight of that with this cynicism which has been produced by neoliberalism. Berlusconi is a cynical phenomenon. Yeah? He's a phenomenon of cynicism.
But he still has 30% of the population voted for him at the last election.
Yeah, but he's a phenomenon of a general cynicism. It's cynicism in the cultural elite as well. It's cynicism on the left. He's a phenomenon of all of us. He's not just a phenomenon of the 30%. Sorry.
Yeah.
Every Italian has to bear responsibility for Berlusconi and for a cynical reaction to the situation of neoliberalism, to the response to the changes after '89, to the end of ideology. You know, there is a collapse of the post-war settlement, post-Second World War and post-fascist model in the Iberian Peninsula, also the post-communist model, if you like, in Italy, the settlement after Berlinguer was excluded by the Americans. The post-fascist model in Greece. Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely true that settlement is closing down, failing, and people don't know what's going to happen afterwards. And I understand completely. I have a lot of sympathy for that. There's also a problem of the post-war settlement in Northern Europe also collapsing. So these consensual agreements that society made in Europe over the last sometimes 70, sometimes 40 years, are cracking open, and that of course produces huge degrees of insecurity and therefore of fear. But we have to remember also that there are still possibilities in Europe. Yeah, that it's not collapsed. It's not the Democratic Republic of Congo.
How, according to your point of view, is culture and contemporary art facing and or representing this situation in Europe?
Oh, I mean, I think most of the world, whether it's the political, economic, or cultural world, is running around like headless chickens in Europe. I mean, we have absolutely no orientation of where we're going. Yeah, there's no horizon, there's no direction, there's no arrow, there's nothing which points us anywhere. But that's a situation we've created. Yeah, we created it out of the cynicism, which also existed on the left. We've created it out of criticality, which said it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you have a critical position. Then you can work with whoever you like. Then your ethics can go out the window. Yeah, all those things were produced by the intelligentsia of Europe. So of course the intelligentsia has no answer to this situation because they produced it in the first place. This is what they wanted. Cynicism, the fact that neoliberalism produced a kind of cynicism on the thinking left, if you want to call that. I don't really interested in left and right divisions anymore, but on the thinking resistance, which said it doesn't really matter anymore what we do. It doesn't really matter anymore what we say. It doesn't really matter what our ethics are. As long as we can get away with a nice tenured position in a university or a nice position in a museum or whatever, then things will be okay. And we can sit in our little clubs and we can say how terrible the world is, but we're not going to be affected by it. Any reasonable reaction would involve a huge self-critique.
So what do you think is...
And that's not happening. Look at the Dutch situation. Yeah, where is the self-critique of the artistic community in the face of the financial cuts? It's not there, more or less. I mean, it's beginning to emerge. It's starting. Yeah, I'm not hopeless. I'm not unoptimistic.
But how do you think we can in Europe change the course of this stream?
I think let's. Okay, I'm not interested in left and right.
Do we have chances?
How did we build socialism in the first place? You had the idea of socialism. Yeah, it was people knocking on doors. It was people in workers' education initiatives. It was people thinking about the excluded, people thinking about mental illness, thinking about poverty, and then working on the ground in micro communities, trying to educate and develop people to think about the world differently, yeah? To imagine that the neoliberal doctrine of it is no alternative is not true, and there is an alternative, and it's a genuine alternative, and we can change our value systems. It took a long, long time. Yeah, the Communist Manifesto was published in 1848. It took a long time for these things to start to filter through. Yeah, that's the job of a cultural elite that wants to be engaged in emancipation and not just engaged in drinks drinks parties.
Yeah. Do you see that is it happening somewhere, or is not happening at all in Europe?
No, I think it is happening. I mean, the fact we can have this conversation means that to some extent it's happening. At least people are thinking about it. When I first went to the Netherlands, what I found was a decadent, lazy, unengaged society. And this I'm talking about the cultural elite here. I'm not talking about the so-called enemies of the entrepreneurial side. Yeah, I'm talking about the cultural elite, people that took their subsidies for granted, who even were artists because there were subsidies, or were curators because there were subsidies. To be honest, yeah? People who wanted to play a kind of what would you say is a sort of the drawing room politics in which they could sit in their comfortable armchairs and pontificate about where the world was wrong, but were not really engaged in taking action. That's the world that I saw, and you know, I was part of it. I'm also to blame for this. Yeah, we were all part of it. Now it seems to me we have to try and construct a much more positive argument in order to be attractive for people. In order to pull people towards us, we have to construct propositions for how the world can be otherwise, and not just critiques of how bad the world is today. There's a hugely different agenda, and I see there in certain initiatives, you know, what the small organisation called Casco in Utrecht are doing with domestic workers. I see there an example of something that actually is quite interesting. It's not sexy for the art market. And remember, most of this intellectual drawing room discourse was pretty sexy for the art market. Why did it happen in Frieze or in Artissima or something like this, that all these intellectuals went and talked in art fairs? I mean, that tells you something about where it's going wrong, yeah, or where it went wrong. Yeah, if this is just a decoration for the selling of product, then there's obviously something wrong about the interest groups that are aligned there. So when you work with domestic workers in Utrecht, it's not such a sexy issue. Yeah, not many people are that interested in it. But that seems to me where if you're going to find the green shoots of optimism, you're going to find them much more there than you are in the Frieze Art Fair.